And good evening. This is Cammvetsmedia. We are live from Arlington, Texas at Loewy's Hotel, the American Athletic Association Media Day, the introduction of Army West Point to the American Athletic Association, the AAC as it's known. And so it's a milestone day for Army and for West Point. Coach Jeff Monken was down here, Bryson Daly, and Max Domenico representing the team. And there'll be more. Each of the coaches will be speaking tomorrow, describing their teams and prospects for the season. So very glad to have joining us tonight. And that is Steve Shalou calling in from South Philadelphia. Steve, how are you? South Jersey, how are you?
Doing really well. How are you, Ken?
Good, good. And calling in from Florida, from a hotbed of Atlantic Athletic Association, American Athletic Association hotbed. We have Richard Miller. How are you, Richard?
Awesome. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, we're going to have a couple of Florida teams are in the conference. South Florida, of course, and then also right near you, we will have Florida Atlantic. In fact, that will be Army's opening game in the conference in September, right on, after Labor Day. And so a big event for Army to join a conference after nearly 30 years of being an independent. They have decided to that the advantages of being in a conference will outweigh the advantage they have enjoyed as an independent. Steve Shalou, how are you? What was your thought on Army joining the American Athletic Conference?
You know, I thought that it was a good move for Army to do that, and we fought it for a long time to stay independent. But the tea leaves were kind of pointing towards finding your niche with a conference alignment. The independence and the way the conference scheduling was going to go is going to be very difficult for Army in October, November, and early December to be able to start scheduling opponents. And we're probably going to have to be forced into a conference at some point in time. And I didn't, personally didn't want to be in the MAC and some of the other conferences where we'd be playing on Tuesday nights and playing what I think is a lesser caliber of opponents. Not saying that they're not great, but in terms of where we recruit and other things, I think that the American Conference really aligns with who we are, and I thought that we struck on our own terms as much as possible. I had to work some things out with Army Navy and some other things, but I thought it was the best move available for Army at the time, and I'm excited that we're a part of that conference.
Good, Richard Miller. Good to see you. You're down in on the east coast of Florida near Boca Raton, Palm Beach, and you've got had an American Athletic Conference team right in your backyard in Florida Atlantic. What was your thought on Army joining a conference?
My thought on Army joining the conference, I think it's a very good thing that Army is joining a conference, because you get to play, I think, a much more, again, competitive schedule. And with having a lot more teams in a conference, it does make it more like interesting for like maybe the chances of Army maybe potentially playing not only for a conference championship, but now maybe getting into the maybe even getting into the college football playoff, which is expanding starting this season.
Well, that is a good point, Richard, that you hit right on, that this does give Army a chance to be in the national competitive college football playoff. The broadcaster behind me here on Media Row at the American Athletic Conference Media Day was just talking about they're excited at UTSA, University of Texas San Antonio. According to Athlon, they are the #2 ranked team in the conference, right behind Memphis and ahead of South Florida, Tulane, and then Army's picked to be the #5 team in the conference. That's a pretty good standing, followed by Rice, your Florida Atlantic team, East Carolina, North Texas, then Navy, University of Alabama, Birmingham, Tulsa, Charlotte, and Temple. Steve Shalou, what do you think when you hear that lineup of teams and some of the better teams, Memphis, UTSA, South Florida, and how Army's going to match up with them?
Well, I thought coming out of the gate, we had a pretty fortunate draw conference play-wise this year, not having Memphis and not having South Florida on our schedule for sure. UTSA will be a tough game. They've been tough. We played them really, really well as of late, and we'll get them late in the season where we'll know who we are, and they're not going to catch us by surprise, nor are we going to catch them by surprise. So I think that will be a great matchup for us. I think we have a very fortunate schedule the first year coming out. But with a conference like this, no game is a gimme. So we're going to have to be on our best throughout the season. But I think we have a decent opportunity to make a splash within the conference this year.
Yeah, when you look at the schedule opening up with Lehigh and then at Florida Atlantic, home game against Rice, at Temple, who appears to be struggling, at Tulsa, UAB, East Carolina at home, Air Force at home, and then kind of the really toughest part of the schedule is at Air Force on November 2nd, then November 9th at North Texas and Dallas, and then the game at Notre Dame versus Notre Dame at Yankee Stadium on November 23rd, and then, as you said, the UTSA game. How does that lineup match up? Certainly, Army has a chance to get ahead on the season early, but that November schedule really looks like it's going to be one tough game after another.
Yeah, I mean, that latter part of the season, two things can really happen that we've got to make sure that we're doing well with. One is, we've got some tough opponents, right? We're going to play Notre Dame at a neutral site, which will be difficult for us. UTSA coming into Mikey. We're going to be playing in a stadium that may not have a lot of people in it. It's a Thanksgiving Saturday. So it could be, the cadets probably not going to be there. So, that advantage is gone. We're not going to have the stands there. And then North Texas is as of late has been pretty strong. They've lost some players to either the portal or graduation, but they're going to be tough. And then coming out of Air Force is going to be looking for blood after what we did in Denver last year to them. So, those last four, 2 out of 4 is a really good situation for us. Winning 3 out of 4 would be optimal. 4 out of 4, we're going to be making some waves in college football, but, we'd love to be able to come out of that 2 or 3 wins in the last 4 and carry momentum going into Navy. The second part of it is how healthy we can be coming out, playing some pretty quality opponents, especially Notre Dame, UTSA. We're not going to have as much of a break before Navy. And that'll be a big squad. UTSA has got some big boys down there in Texas. So we just got to make sure we're staying healthy. We'll have a bye before we get to Notre Dame, but we got to be healthy and ready to go going into Navy.
Absolutely. Steve, you mentioned something that's going to be a factor the next 2 years at Mikey Stadium for home games is that the East stands have been torn down right after graduation, and they'll be constructing a new modern $100 million plus grandstand with luxury boxes, but it's going to take 2 full seasons to complete. What's your thought on that? It's going to be great once it's done, but it's going to be 2 years where the stadium's not going to look like and view is not going to be what we've experienced for years and years. And so it's also, as you said, going to be less people there.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is we're going to have vantage points, especially this season, because they're not going to have very much steel out of the ground by the time the season's ready to go. We're going to have vantage points that we haven't seen since the early 1900s. So you'll be able to see Lusk Reservoir. You'll be able to see down to the Cadet Chapel unobstructed. It's going to be an interesting kind of view on how that's going to look. So that, I think that'll be interesting. And, they're going to place the core in the end zone. That will, change the vantage point with that. And then the real difficulty will be, the first couple of games coming out of the gate, Lehigh, and when we play Rice, is how's traffic flow going to be? How early can people get there so that they can get into the stands and start, Army with momentum early part of the game? Because there's going to be a difficult time getting into the stadium because of all the choke points that are not going to be available anymore due to the construction. So I'm anxious to see how force protection and how the post handles that portion of it. I've had some meetings with the athletic department about it, and they are cautiously optimistic, but they said it's not going to be easy.
Well, yeah, they're going to be shutting down that whole area. That road will be closed between the stadium and Lusk Reservoir. It does bring up an interesting observation from the history of the stadium, that it really was designed to be multi-purpose. Initially, they played baseball there. And I've seen some pictures in the baseball configuration where basically Reservoir was like, beyond the right field fence, like Oracle Park in San Francisco. And they used to get big crowds at some of the college baseball games back in the 1920s and so on. But those permanent stands were constructed in the 1960s. They were nothing fancy, but they did the job, and a very rudimentary visiting team locker room that I was there a couple of times, and it was built for when college football teams were a lot smaller in numbers of players than they are today, with 65 on the travel squad. So my understanding is the visitors will use the lacrosse buildings, locker rooms for the 2 years. And so that's probably an improvement for them. I guess, Steve, there's a lot of changes this year. As Richard alluded to, it's the start of the 12-team college football playoff. The week after the Army-Navy game will be the first round with the bottom 8 teams playing at the 4 higher seeds campus sites, and then those winners playing. My understanding is those on or around become the New Year's bowl games, and then you have the championship game the week after. What do you see? How do you like that format and that tournament setup for the college football playoff?
Well, I think it's pretty fortunate because there is a sacred date on the schedule, and that date is December 14th, right? That's the Army-Navy game. And keeping that day as sacred as possible, I think, is important for a lot of Americans, not just Army or Navy football fans. Here is a situation that if we had a really strong squad, we could be playing a 13-game schedule conference-wise, and then go into, they could have 15 or 16. We're starting to infringe upon what a NFL schedule looks like at that point, and whether or not do we have the stamina, and is it healthy for college players to play that many games? I'm anxious to see how that all plays out. But I think it's good for college football. It adds weekends with some notoriety, and it gives fans a reason to get excited to watch. I don't think it'll take away from the other bowl games, because I think the conference alignments, in a way that they've been going, have kind of done that already. So I think it's going to be exciting to see, whether or not a team can catch fire. And with the transfer portal, I think there is a lot more parity. I mean, when you're looking in the SEC, you're looking at Georgia, but then you got Texas coming and making a resurgence, and Alabama is going to maybe be the 3rd, 4th, or 5th best team in that conference. So there's a little bit of I think parity that's going to start opening up, that can allow for other teams to catch fire and make waves in college football.
Well, it's going to be something. You mentioned conference realignment, the growth of the Southeast Conference with the additions of Texas and Oklahoma, and then on the Big Ten side, you have the 4 West Coast teams. joining in Washington, Oregon, USC, and UCLA. So those are two mega conferences. The Big 12 has kind of solidified, taking in a lot of the remnants of the Pac-10 or Pac-12, which just went out of business. It's hard to imagine a conference of that stature operating almost 100 years. What's your thought on what's happening with conference realignment, Steve, and conferences like the Pac-12 going out of business, and the talk that the Atlantic Coast Conference is at risk?
Yeah, the Atlantic Coast. I mean, I was watching sports radio this afternoon, and they were talking about the ACC and Clemson and Florida State thinking about filing lawsuits to get out of that contract, and the ramifications of the Atlantic Coast Conference. Because a lot of it's basketball and a lot of other sports. I mean, you think about baseball and basketball, and what some sort of a dissolving of that conference or a massive realignment. They didn't allow West Virginia into that conference, which I thought was a huge mistake, especially with Pittsburgh being in there, and what type of rivalries that could have brought on forth. So I think that the next 2 years will be super important to see whether or not the ACC can hold on, and whether or not those teams can play strong enough football to be relevant, to keep the ACC relevant, because the ramifications on other sports could be huge on that. I think there's definitely a place for the ACC, along with the Big 10 and the Big 12. So we've got to keep these other conferences, and I think there are enough players to go around where they can be relevant enough to make a splash with the 12-team playoff. So let's just hope that we can keep that going.
Yeah, one of the concerns with the Atlantic Coast Conference is that in addition to Clemson and Florida State having wanting to move elsewhere, you have North Carolina and Duke being discussed as possible members of the Big Ten. And they qualify because of one of the things of the Big Ten, you've got to be in the university association, which is a highly prestigious academic grouping of colleges and universities. Do you see that as something that has any potential of happening, UNC and Duke leaving?
I don't know what that looks like in the future. I don't know. I mean, that's definitely a huge ramification of the ACC falling apart. I hadn't thought about that, Ken.
Okay, well, that's I don't see Duke being able to compete year in and year out in the Big Ten in football. They obviously would in basketball and many of the other sports. I don't know if that would be really a good move for them, except it's more television money. Then we've got, the issue is if the Atlantic Coast Conference loses schools, whether they go to leagues like the American that Army plays in and looks to bring in schools such as maybe a Memphis might be a fit some have discussed, or possibly others. And that could affect what the American Athletic Conference looks like that Army has just joined. This kind of reshuffling of teams seems, every time there's an opening in one of the second-tier conferences that they're looking for others to join. Is that a concern in your mind that a couple of the American Athletic Conference teams could end up joining a reformatted Atlantic Coast Conference?
I think so. I mean, you just, you can really make your head hurt trying to think about all the combinations of what could happen. You just kind of adjust. A team like Memphis has played a lot of really good football. Academically, I don't think they're probably as strong as what the ACC would like. I would think more of I had mentioned West Virginia. I think they would be a better fit for the ACC than say Memphis would be. So I think the teams in the American Conference would kind of absorb from below. If you consider the MAC below, we can be debatable on that, but where they may absorb a team like the MAC from the MAC, or a team from, let's say, like a Troy from the Sun Belt, where they may pluck and pull up. I think once the music stops and the chairs get taken, I think there will be the above conferences will pull from below, and then there may be a consolidation of the below teams into a smaller grouping. When you look at the MAC, when you look at the Sun Belt, when you look at the like the Mountain West and what's left over with that, it's hard to try to look into a crystal ball and figure out what's going to be the future of that, for sure.
Yeah, just looking, at the other conference that's really, it's hard to recognize now is the Big 12, having lost Texas and Oklahoma. They've got Texas Tech, Central Florida, TCU, Kansas, Kansas State, Utah, BYU, West Virginia, Arizona State, Oklahoma State, Cincinnati, Iowa State, Baylor, Houston, Colorado, Arizona. It's like you don't know who's in a conference without a scorecard. And there's some very long-standing good football programs in that conference. They want to be considered on the same level as the Big Ten and the SEC. Do you feel like the Big 12, the way it's configured now, is close to the other two conferences?
No, I don't think it is. I don't. I think the Big 12, they've got to find an identity pretty quickly, and they've got to figure out a way to hype up some rivalries to build some buzz and some excitement within the Big 12, because they really have lost their identity rapidly.
Yeah, you got some big programs: Arizona State, Iowa State, Colorado is had a tough end of their season last year. We really enjoyed the day when the Army football team, went out to the University of Colorado and practiced on the field house there. Deion Sanders came out to greet the team, and Coach Munkin. But they struggled. I think they lost their last 6 in the season. Do you see Colorado becoming a factor? I mean, Houston is struggling now, and Arizona is struggling. Where do you see a team that can kind of be the face of that Big 12 conference?
I mean, I think the face of the Big 12 conference it's got to be Colorado coming out of the gate, just purely out of the hype and the media machine and the ties to the West Coast, and Coach Prime will get the best out of his players. And he just did. I mean, I was amazed at how successful he was with the amount of shaking up he did that first year coming out. He is a great motivator of men. He's a great coach, and he has a really good coaching staff around him. So I think, and they're going to play a lot of games on TV just out of the fact that he is prime time, and he's going to bring a lot of butts to the seats. So I think they'll end up kind of taking on the face. I think Arizona's a much improved team. So, somebody's going to have to step up, and there'll be some rivalries and things that will come out. And Iowa State always plays good football. So I think they can make some waves. And if they get a team that wins a game or so inside the playoffs, then they can get some notoriety for sure.
Well, Athlon has got Utah as the #1 team, Kansas State,
Sure.
then Oklahoma State, Kansas, Arizona, and then West Virginia. It's hard to get media attention when the face of your league is Utah or Kansas State. They're just, it's going to be a challenge. Kansas is good, as you said, Arizona. So we'll see. Well, let's go back to taking a look at Army. We saw Bryson Daly at the media day. He'll speak a little bit more tomorrow. He had a strong end to his season. Very strong game, of course, against against Air Force, and then just another strong performance against Navy. What are some of the keys that you see, Steve, for Army football? You've lost the two big fullbacks. What are some of the keys that you see going into the season?
Yeah, so Bryson he's a great leader, and is a great quarterback for us. I mean, he if you could mold out of clay somebody that you'd want to be a quarterback, he would be kind of where you'd want to be. And he was able to throw the ball a little bit last year, and he runs like a truck, and he makes good decisions, and he doesn't cough the ball up very much. So that's all the things that Coach Monken wants in a quarterback. So again, when I talk about Army football and you talk about how a offense is put together, you gotta think about up the middle and up front, right? So the middle being the center, and we've got a second-year guy who started as a true freshman last year, and he's a strong Brady Small, strong, compact. He hits, and he can control that line of scrimmage. So our center position is secured. Our quarterback is secured. And then, fullback wise, I went to the spring game and I saw some really good things at fullback. And I think and hopefully maybe we get a little bit lighter and a little bit quicker at fullback. We've always been, as much we've had some pretty heavy big guys, with Buchanan and when we ran the triple option or the option offense, that we may go to a little bit of a quicker running back up the middle there, but our running backs, we've got a lot of promise. With Udo and Tyrell Robinson, we got a ton of promise. Udo could be a 1,300 yard back this year. He's got a ton of talent. He is a workhorse. He's got a year under his belt, and I think he's going to be really good. If you look at the size of our offensive line, I talked with, the offensive line coach last week, and we're going to run the option, but we're not going to be the chop block option team of the past. And so our guys are 315, 320, 305. We've got a backup that's 325 to 330. We're going to be a legitimate size offensive line, and we're going to almost zone type block with the option abilities, and we're gonna be physical. So we're gonna trade physicality off for speed, and I think that we've got some talent at the wide receiver spot. Offensively, we will be number 1 and number 2 in the country rushing the ball this year. We will control the line of scrimmage. We will control the time of possession, and we will grind other teams down. And the American Conference is going to have their hands full with us because they haven't seen this from Navy, and I feel that we're going to be extremely successful on offense. Now on defense, we've got quite a bit to replace, and sometimes we have to replace up front, and we have good defensive backs, and sometimes we have to replace defensive backs, and we're good up front. And this year we've got the defensive backfield was decimated through graduation. Our linebackers, we had some 2 linebackers that are trying to play in the pros right now, and we've had some losses up front. But our front 7 shows a lot of promise. Caleb Fortner had the game of his life against Navy and set the tone for him coming on board for next year to be that linebacker for the next couple of years that we've had each year. We're almost like a mini linebacker U. So he's kind of come in there, and I expect good things from him. And then up front, we're 280, 290 up front defensively. We've got some athleticism at nose tackle. But our defensive backfield, it doesn't have the experience that we've had, and we don't have the leaders that we've had in the past. And then we're going to have some players that are going to have to step up and do some good things in the backfield. We've got some plebes that are coming on board that are 3-star recruits that can come in and possibly contribute. But defensively, we're going to have to pressure up front to take a little bit of relief off of the defensive backfield. We're not going to have a lot of cakewalks in our schedule. So we're going to have to be on it from the beginning in each and every game. I mean, I think we have a relatively talented team. That the cupboards are not bare by any stretch of the imagination. And I'm a firm believer in what happens to the offensive line. I think we have a very, very strong offensive line this year.
Well, one of the players you mentioned, Tyrell Robinson, it's amazing he'll be a senior, has been coming off of a couple of serious injuries, and I don't think he ever got to full speed last year. He kind of had limited playing time, and they were never sure that he was 100%. In fact, he wasn't ready to play the first several games of the year. Now you're also changing the positions, going back to I expect Tyrell will be in at a slot back role. How much of a factor do you think Tyrell Robinson can be to the offense this year?
And I think he can be a tremendous asset to us, and this is why. I mean, to have the devastating injury that he had against Wake Forest, and I can still see the play in my mind's eye, right? So it takes a while, especially when somebody runs on the edge and lives on the edge like he does. I mean, he was cuts and he was putting a lot of stress on his lower body. It takes, I mean, you can come back physically. We can test your leg, we can test your ligaments, we can test, where you are, but mentally, you've got to break that scar tissue in your mind to allow yourself to get back fully. And that takes a while. I mean, even Tom Brady talked about it when he was playing against the Chiefs and he blew his knee out, that it took some games of him getting hit on the knee again. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh, okay, I'm okay. And then off you go. And then you're able to do that. So, I think that Tyrell needed to get out there and play at game speed, but I didn't think mentally he was fully back. And so he's now had another 8 to 9 months of getting his mind right on his body, because his body, the way surgeons are these days and the way that people, they can recover, you can be back almost as good as new, but is your mind there? Because it takes a lot to get that mind right. So I think he's had his time to be able to do that. And I think he'll be a tremendous amount of factor, but when he's not going to be the featured guy as much as he had been in the past because of Udo, it takes a little of the pressure off of him. So, he can do his thing and he doesn't have to always try to break it, because they've got a talented backfield this year. So about as talented as I've seen it in a while. So I'm excited about what that means for each of those backs.
Well, one of the things that I really complimented Bryson Daly on last year was being able to work with a freshman center, Brady Small, and then to go through the end of season changes to the offense where they went from the shotgun back to under center in the Coastal Carolina game. And Coach Monk and I talked about it afterwards. What a big change that was. He kind of felt like it wasn't as big a deal. But then to go back into the Navy game where they had been trying to camouflage what they were going to do against Navy, and but it seemed I really thought Bryson Daly and Brady Small handled some of the changes very well. How difficult is it, and what do you expect Army's going to do under center versus shotgun this season?
Well, number one, I mean, to make things even more complicated, Brady Small wasn't even an offensive lineman at the prep school. So I mean, the job he did could go down in history as one of the most inspiring and incredible job as a freshman. It's tough enough, I got a chance to play a little bit as a freshman, and it was a mind screw. How difficult, how fast, and I was older because I was prior service. I was 22 years old and was more mature, and it still was difficult to get your mind in a situation. Not only was he changing positions, he was changing positions and starting and under a shotgun, and then under center. And listen, he could be one of the greats that Army's ever had.
And I think we're gonna attack this year. I mean, if you look at that Coastal Carolina game was an indictment on the previous and that offensive coordinator, good guy. He's gone. He's moved on, and I think that they've made a commitment that they're going to go after it, and rightfully so, because we just at times just didn't feel like Army football. We didn't have the time of possession game. We didn't have that ability to grind out the third and fourth quarter and grind that clock down. So I'm excited that we can get under center and start coming at people with an offensive line that is 315, 320, 305, that has some experience, with a quarterback that's got grit and some running backs that can go to the angle. I think we're going to be tough to defend this year.
Very good. And I guess Max DiDomenico is down here. We talked today, and it was really neat that both of the players that represented Army today, and I'll speak a little bit at the media day tomorrow, are from Texas. And of course, Bryson Daly, son of a high school football coach here in Texas, and then Max DiDomenico from the state. Max, again, is one of the seniors, along with Aaron Bibbins in the defensive backfield. There's some other names: Hamilton Baker, Tommy Zitello, Joshua Banks. There's some new players that are going to have to step up. Army played seniors and fifth-year players, had tremendous experience in the backfield. Is kind of unprecedented. But now you've got a new group in, and a lot's going to fall on the shoulders of Max DiDomenico. And of course, Caleb Fortner, I think, has a chance to be Army's next star linebacker.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. His coming out party was the Army-Navy game, and he showed what he could do with that. And Max, I mean, that defensive backfield last year was pretty darn talented. So they've got some big shoes to fill. But, Coach will have it's a discipline position. It's a different discipline. Know your assignments, keep the ball inside and up front, and make plays where you're able to do that. And our team and our players are the type of players that are going to be disciplined. So that plays to our favor. I mean, you listen to Bill Belichick. He talks about next man up, and it's their opportunity for next man up. And if you look at the depth chart, you're looking at juniors and seniors, and that's kind of the way Army football has been. It's been, when we were really successful into the Jim Young and the Bob Seton years, it was you came in as a freshman, you get the snot beaten out of you on the scout team. As a sophomore, you're getting some special team play and some mop-up duties. As a junior, you're fighting to start, and then you start junior and senior, and then you hand it over to the next guy. And that's kind of back what we're into right now, where we got juniors and some mostly seniors that are stepping up, and they've been working, doing the reps. And that's the beauty of not having a lot of activity in the transfer portal, is that you get to have the opportunity to grow your team in the culture, with the mentality of selfless service, and then you get to that junior senior year, you're ready to do those things. And that's what Fortner is going to do this year. I mean, he's going to come up, and he's going to you look at low end, and you look at the Kings and those type Andersons in the past. He's going to step into that role, and he's going to do great things for the team, for sure. So defensively, mostly, I mean, we don't see anybody in the depth charts that are sophomores or freshmen. Maybe somebody emerges in training camp, but right now you've earned it, you've grinded it, you've cut your teeth, you did all those things, and now you're ready to step up, play, and be a part of a great system.
Okay, and Richard Miller, I thought you and I would discuss, and we'll get Steve's input on who's in the top 25 in college football this year. Do you have a listing that you've been looking at?
Yeah, the post spring rankings. I tried to look up actually preseason, but I'm not sure if those are actually out yet.
Well, I've got a listing, and why don't you see if you agree, and we'll get Steve's comment from Athlon. Is they've got Georgia's #1 in the country, followed by Ohio State,
Definitely.
Oregon, Texas, and Ole Miss, up to #5. With Alabama 6, Michigan 7, Penn State 8, Notre Dame 9, who we're going to see at Yankee Stadium, and 10, Missouri, who we beat, Army beat in the Armed Forces Bowl a couple of years ago in a memorable moment. Steve, what do you think of that top 25? You've got Georgia, and with Nick Saban retiring from Alabama, it creates some uncertainty about that iconic program.
Yeah, trying to pick the top 25 this early on is an exercise. I mean, it's really kind of an exercise, and because you're going to always have these big name programs are going to be in there because they reload each year. Michigan's, the Georgias. You're going to throw in an Alabama. Some of the interesting names that I see on there. And NC State. I feel kind of strong about NC State because I've got a kind of a kinship to Boo Corrigan.
Sure.
I like him a lot. Tennessee. I love to see Tennessee make some waves. Kansas State, interesting. Oklahoma State. I think their head coach is off the charts, loony in a great way. I think he's a great coach and a motivator of men. I'd love to see him in the mix. Arizona being in the top 20. Virginia Tech, it's been forever since Beamer was there, and they were relevant. To see them back in relevancy is great. Iowa, Iowa in there, there'll be a bunch of 3-0 games with Iowa because they play defense, but they can't seem to score a point. Kansas, interesting enough, because Jeff Monken's name was thrown around with Kansas and their the head coach in the head coach search. To see Kansas having relevance again is kind of interesting to be a part of that. Miami, we grew up with the Hurricanes of old. To see them relevant again. USC, I don't have much emotion with that. But there are some teams in there that are poking their heads in there that make it a little bit interesting. But you got to wait till about the 4th game of the season before we can see how things are going to fall out because of the transfer portal. Teams can get hot very rapidly, or they can get really devastated quickly too. So, I find it's good for cocktail talk, but other than that, I'm not. I would have to wait until the 4th or 5th game to make any other big statements about it.
I kind of look at what's going to happen to teams that are used to winning 10 games a year, the USCs or the Oklahomas or Alabama, Auburn. When you throw all these good teams together, used to be teams could dominate smaller conferences and get their 10 or 11 wins a year. But now you're going to throw all these teams together into the same conference, and somebody has to lose these games. So I think, is that going to be what kind of happens? It is early on, a few teams are going to do well and establish themselves as the top of the Big Ten or the SEC. And some teams that were good are going to kind of fall in the bell curve of the middle of these conferences. How do you see that working when you throw all these good teams together into the Big Ten and the SEC?
Well, it's going to, definitely affect, you could have some 3-loss teams that are better than undefeated teams in other conferences. So you're going to have a lot of pundits that are going to be talking about, when you're doing, they're talking about the 12 teams going off in the playoffs. I mean, you could end up with you look at the SEC alone, you could have Georgia, you could have Texas. Mizzou is one that they're talking about. Tennessee is one they're talking about. And then Alabama's, DeBoer is going to have them ready to play no matter what. Those are 5 teams that could be better than, the Big 12 winner without a doubt. So, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays at LSU. Going to be tough. So, and they've eliminated
the two divisions or whatever they were called within the SEC, and it's going to be one giant free for all. And they're going to take the two best records. It's going to be interesting how to play out, because there were a lot of times within the SEC that certain schools were lucky because the rest of their division was poor, and they got into the championship game just out of the fact that they were the strongest of the shortest people. So this year, I think, is going to be a very interesting year to see how it kind of plays out, because there are so many factors that are into play with the portal and alignment, and nil money is playing huge into this whole thing. If you look at the number of McLarens they backed up into Texas's parking lot for these players, I mean, all this stuff is playing into this. It's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out.
Yeah, see, that's what I wanted to, before we wrap up in our first Army football huddle of the year, and we appreciate you and Richard joining in tonight. I'm in Arlington, Texas at the American Athletic Conference Media Day. We had a chance to meet with Bryson Daly, Max DiDomenico. We had the interview. It's up on Twitter, on my Twitter page right now, and also on LinkedIn. And we'll hear from the players and Coach Monken tomorrow in the general press conference, as each coach is introduced and gets a chance to talk about the season. But the thing that really floored me recently was the NCAA having to settle another lawsuit by agreeing to that there would be salary budgets allowed for teams starting next year. And I think the number was $21 million per team or per school. I don't know if that's football only or football and however else they want to share it, basketball, whatever other sports. What was your impression of that move? Because that seems like it really creates a level of professional football in what had been, college football.
My first impression was how unfair the system was prior to, because of so much money being thrown around at this point that was just being either pocketed by the institution, and the players were literally starving out of season, and it was, we've gone from one extreme to the other at this point, and it's hard to fathom, because I'm the guy that wants to pull his black socks up and yell at you for being on my lawn, right? Because I'm the old guy. But what happens in society is when some injustice happens, we usually swing so far to the other side, and then it oscillates back to somewhere in the middle over time. But I was shocked at the amount of money that they were willing to settle with and get and open it up for the players, and how that's going to be distributed is very interesting to me to see how that all ends up. And I'll be talking with Doug Phillips, who used to be at the Army, and he's one of the premier knowledge guys on nil money in this legislation. And I haven't had a chance to talk to him yet. And I'm interested to have an adult beverage with him and talk this thing out. But it is amazing that we are to the point where that is going to happen, and hopefully schools and players can do it responsibly, so nobody gets hurt, whether it be physically, mentally, or otherwise, with the amount of money and other things that are being thrown around, and that we're able to find a responsible way for this all to happen for the institution and for the players. Because when things get out of balance, that's when one side or the other is going to get hurt. And I hope that college football doesn't get hurt, because it is so great, and it is so pure, and it is so, it brings joy to so many people on Thursday, Friday, Saturdays, and Tuesdays, some Tuesdays, as an institution, that we don't, for lack of a better term, F it up because we aren't doing the right things for all the stakeholders. And that includes the players, the university, the media, and the fans. That if that gets too far out of balance, that we're in a situation where this goes to a place where it can't return from.
So I hope we figure out a way to be responsible as this continues to play out.
But do you think that the kind of middle market programs in Division One are going to be able to keep up with the schools who are in the top three conferences? The top three conferences are going to dominate TV presence and revenue, and it's going to be hard for schools in the Mountain West, in the American, even in the Big 12 to keep up with what's happening. How do you see that dynamic where you've got two conferences dominate television revenue and then the rest of everyone struggling to keep up and then now having to generate revenue to pay players? You've actually got to have a salary budget starting next year. And we have NIL this year, which is pretty close.
Right. And I think, and I liken it to TV. When you look at cable, you have the major players in cable, the CBS, the NBC, the Foxes, but there's still place for, E-Entertainment TV. There's still place for the Food Network. There's still place for all these other networks because you've got a niche of people who are going to watch those shows. And there are a lot of people out there have an affinity for Army football. You're a veteran. You love the way that they played. You knew somebody who went to West Point. You knew, and if that game is on a Thursday night against Temple, you're gonna find it, watch it. Even though it's not Ohio State, Michigan. Now those games are going to get the primetime 3:00 slot on CBS. It's going to be a great game, but there are enough graduates that went to Eastern Carolina that's going to want to see Army play Eastern Carolina. They're going to figure out a way to find that. And you may not be the primetime slot, but you are going to have the ability to, you're going to sell advertising rights. You're going to sell all those things. And there's going to be an audience. Now, it's not going to be the primetime CBS audience or the Fox game of the week, but there will be a market for it. But there'll be less money for that. And that's kind of the way it's always been. The change here is that the players are being compensated. And I think it's gotten a little bit out of hand, although I think they ought to be compensated. But, when you're able to treat a quarterback from Ole Miss or another university as a free agent, and you're calling them up and say, I'll give you $5 million to come play here. That's where the things are gotten a little bit off the rails. They should, figure out where's the best place for me to go and play. And then, oh, by the way, you can be compensated this way for doing that after the fact. But it's almost like the cart is in front of the horse at this point, because those things are happening where schools are, they're contacting players and say, hey, why do you want to play at, heck, I don't know, why do you want to play at Marshall anymore? You can come play for us and we'll pay you $1 million. And that I don't think was the intent of this in any way, but that's what's happening, and that'll have to be cleaned up.
Yeah, I kind of look at also where is women's athletics going to fit into this. I think you're going to see, pressure on the NCAA and also, or whatever entity is running athletics in colleges, that athletes should get a share of this revenue and compensation as well. How do you see that playing out, Steve?
That is a very difficult conversation to have, because I'm a father of an 8-year-old daughter who's means everything to me, and she's very athletic, and hopefully one day she plays division something in a sport she loves, and I get to go watch every game of it. And for me, it wouldn't really matter if she's compensated doing it. But the other side of it is, I think if she is deserving, that she should be. But I also think that it should be commensurate with the amount of revenue that it brings into, because I'm a capitalistic guy by heart, that the amount of revenue that you bring into the university, it ought to be kind of proportionate to that, and certain sports. Now, women's basketball's made a huge leaps and bounds. And quite frankly, I'll watch 10 games of women's softball before I'll watch a game of college baseball. I really will. I think it's more entertaining, and I love the spirit of women's softball. And they're starting to get a lot of money, through ESPN and other stuff. But I think that there needs to be a cause and effect of the revenue you're bringing into the university and the amount that goes into a program. There ought to be a minimum amount for those, but it can't be equal. I don't think it works that way. I may get in trouble for saying that, but I think they ought to get something, but I just don't think it ought to be at a proportionate level.
Well, I think it's going to be one of the questions that comes up sooner than later is, how women athletes in the bigger programs are compensated. One of the things that will remain the same is that there's going to be no compensation of athletes at the service academies other than the stipend that they get. What is it, $1,200 a month? I heard. Is it? I thought it was a little more than that. But
it might be.
And they have to pay expenses. I hear they get their haircut expense deducted from their account.
Books, uniforms, those type of things also.
Yeah, because I'd always been told that you got a free haircut on our day, courtesy of the government. They used to kind of say that, but I heard that a lot of expenses come out. But in seriousness, service academy athletes are not allowed to have a part-time job, and therefore are not eligible for NIL money. They can have an NIL account, and then there will not be participation in the salary that some college athletes will receive starting next year. But that's just it's a special calling when you go to a service academy, especially as we know with all the players and athletes cadets at West Point. It was so great to be at our day this year and see the new class come in. All bright faces, eager to go and get tested and start Beast Barracks. And they'll be coming back from that and starting school in a couple of weeks. But it's just, that's the way it's going to be, Steve, and that's the way it's going to remain, I got to think.
And I think it should be. I really do. And here is why. I had a very close friend of mine whose son was going to West Point, and he played football in high school, and he really wanted a slot on the team. And and I went to one of the coaches and said, this kid's the type of kid you want on your team. He's a great kid. He's the he's the Rudy of a team and all the rest of the stuff. And the coach said to me, Steve, what you don't realize is all of our players are that guy. And just speaks volumes, that these players have a calling, that they want to play on a team like this, that they want to serve selflessly, that they want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And they realize it at 17 and 18 years old, and they make that choice to do that. So, and the riches, I don't necessarily mean monetarily, but the riches of their future lay out front of them through the foundation that school provides to them. So if they can defer a little of instant gratification for now, and that's always been the cadet way, to forego gratification today as their friends are out swimming and going to frat parties and doing all those rest of those things for something bigger, they will reap the rewards in the future of unlimited camaraderie, support, and level of friendship from your team, from your classmates, your teammates, that I wouldn't pass up for any amount of money. The fact that I could 3 a.m. pick up the phone and call any one of my guys and said, I am here and I need your help, come get me. And they would be there within 10 minutes without question. That's the type of calling that they have the foresight to see, and they're passing up what other players are going to get for that future. And that speaks volumes of the type of people that they are. So that's the type we want, and that's the type that we need to have. And God bless them, and I love every one of them for doing it.
It's so good to be at graduation in May, and then an hour later, they donned their new officer uniforms, and I think we had 35 members of the football team commissioned as officers this year, and it was great to see. Richard Miller, what are you looking forward to in this college football season? And I know we're looking forward to being down in South Florida and seeing you as Army plays
Oh
Florida
boy.
Atlantic on September 7th.
Oh boy. I'm looking forward to that game. I'm looking forward to, Army's a season, obviously, hopefully, another season of Army football. How will, Alabama do in the first year without Nick Saban as their coach? How will Michigan also do without Jim Harbaugh, who's now gone to the Los Angeles Chargers? And a team that wins the national championship loses their head coach. How will they eventually do in their how will they eventually adjust to their season?
Okay, good points there, Richard. Steve, anything in particular looking forward to this season? Army football and college football in general?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to Army football coming back out and punching people in the mouth and playing smash mouth football yet again, with a newfound excitement and dedication towards that end. I'm very excited and fortunate to be a part of watching them enter into a conference, because the last conference foray we had was a disaster, and that had a lot to do with the coaching staff that we had back then, whose name we never will mention, because it's like a Harry Potter movie. We can't mention his name because he might come back. And we're going to get out there and we're going to show people on a national stage that we belong, and that Army football is relevant and ready to go on that. And I'm excited to see how all of this plays out with teams in the top 25. And college football season's the best time of year. I mean, I love the crisp in the air and sitting in the A lot and having tailgates and hugging people, and it's the purest of time, and my battery gets recharged for the entire year for that time that we have celebrating the pure thing called Army football.
Thank you, Steve. Well, I'm just looking forward to the season starting. We'll be up at training camp when they start next week, and be at the Saturday scrimmages coming up in August, and then looking forward to the opener against Lehigh. It's August 30th, and then the first game in the American Athletic Conference that will be down at Richard's town in Boca Raton against Florida Atlantic on September 7th, and then the home opener is September 21st against Rice. Kind of odd that you got a bye week scheduled there. On the should be a game on the 14th, so you got an early bye week. But should be good. Of course, the Air Force and Navy games. Navy will be down in Washington, D.C. this year. And then the game against Notre Dame at Yankee Stadium. I remember I was at the last time Army played Notre Dame at Yankee Stadium. Gorgeous evening. It wasn't really a neutral site. It was a Notre Dame home game. And they had 55,000 Notre Dame fans there, or whatever it was. And but what I always remember about that game is Army defensive captain Steve Anderson telling his players in the second half, they were down, 24-3, something like that, said, just play football, turn off the scoreboard, play football the way you know how to. And they limited Notre Dame to 7 points in the second half. And even when Notre Dame threw a 370-pound left tackle at him, I remember the guy going in the game and saying a 370-pound offensive lineman for Notre Dame. But some good players for Army. That was Josh McNary was in that game along with Steve Anderson, Mike Gann, and quite a few other notables. So we'll look forward to that. But I want to thank Steve Shalou for joining us tonight, and Richard Miller for his help setting this up. And I
My
appreciate
pleasure.
appreciate everybody at West Point. A lot of support last year personally that I value so much. I can't tell you. And I'm looking forward to a new season. Saw Coach Munkin today. He said he was on a family vacation last week and it tired him out. He said he can't wait to get to practice. He said he's at home on the practice field teaching and inspiring and leading and so on. And so he'll be back out there next week, and we'll look forward to joining and covering those practices. And again, if anyone would like to help sponsor, we're going to try to get to every road game this year and provide on-site coverage of Army's both home games and away games. Please contact me, and you can be part of our coverage of Army football. So again, thanks to Steve and to Richard. This is Ken Kraetzer for Cammvetsmedia. Cammvetsmedia covers cadets, midshipmen, the military, and veterans proudly since 2008. And this week we are live from Arlington, Texas, and the American Athletic Conference Media Day. Thanks for watching.